Television has given us countless memorable moments over the decades, but some transcend entertainment and become profound reminders of human resilience and redemption. On an October afternoon in 2024, Family Feud was recording what appeared to be another spirited competition between two enthusiastic families. The studio audience was engaged, the energy was high, and Steve Harvey was prepared to guide contestants through the familiar format that had made the show a beloved staple of American television. However, one contestant was carrying a truth so powerful that when she finally found the courage to speak it aloud, the revelation would stop the game entirely, move Steve Harvey to tears, and ultimately inspire millions of viewers to re-examine what truly matters in life. What happened in those extraordinary minutes proved that sometimes the most important victories have nothing to do with prize money or game show records. If you value authentic moments of courage and transformation, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like button and subscribing. The story you are about to hear demonstrates why honesty and redemption remain among the most powerful forces in human experience. Catherine Walsh was 58 years old and had spent the previous 2 decades living with a burden that had shaped every aspect of her existence. She stood backstage at the Family Feud studio in Los Angeles with her daughter Nicole, her son-in-law James, and her 2 adult grandchildren. To anyone observing the family, they appeared close and comfortable with one another. Catherine was well dressed and composed, her silver hair styled elegantly, her posture reflecting years of professional experience. However, beneath that polished exterior existed a woman who had been preparing for this moment for far longer than the few weeks since learning her family had been selected to appear on the show. Catherine had grown up in Boston during the 1960s and 1970s, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had instilled in her a powerful sense of duty, respectability, and the importance of maintaining proper appearances. Her father had worked as a police officer, and her mother had been a homemaker who took tremendous pride in presenting their family as upstanding members of their community. Catherine had absorbed these values deeply, learning early that what others thought of you mattered greatly, and that certain things were simply not discussed outside the family, or sometimes even within it. Catherine had married her husband Patrick when she was 22 years old. He had been a promising young attorney, charming and ambitious. They had settled into what appeared to be an ideal life in a comfortable suburb outside Boston. Patrick's career advanced steadily. Catherine worked as a bank manager, contributing to their household income and building her own successful career. They purchased a beautiful home, joined the country club, and became active in their church and community organizations. To everyone who knew them, the Walshes represented the American dream fully realized. Their daughter Nicole was born when Catherine was 26. Catherine threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to every aspect of her life. She wanted to provide Nicole with every advantage, every opportunity that she herself had received and more. Nicole attended excellent schools, participated in music lessons and sports, and grew into a bright, accomplished young woman. On the surface, everything appeared ideal. However, the reality behind that perfect facade was far more complicated and painful. Patrick had become increasingly controlling as the years progressed. What had initially seemed like protectiveness gradually revealed itself as a need to dominate every aspect of family life. He made all significant decisions unilaterally. He controlled the finances completely, giving Catherine an allowance despite her own substantial income. He dictated which friends were acceptable, which activities were appropriate, and how the family should present itself to the outside world. He was never physically violent, but his emotional manipulation was comprehensive and devastating. Catherine had learned to manage his moods, to anticipate his demands, and to maintain the appearance of the perfect marriage that their community expected. She told herself that this was what marriage required, that compromise and accommodation were simply part of adult responsibility. Her own mother had endured difficulties in her marriage and had counseled Catherine that a woman's role was to keep the peace, to support her husband, and to maintain family unity regardless of personal cost. Catherine had accepted this guidance and shaped her life accordingly. However, everything changed when Nicole was 17 years old. Catherine discovered that Patrick had been having an affair with a colleague for over 2 years. The discovery was devastating, not merely because of the betrayal itself, but because it shattered the illusion that Catherine had worked so hard to maintain. All the compromise, all the accommodation, all the careful management of appearances had been for nothing. Patrick had violated their marriage while Catherine had been sacrificing her own needs and happiness to preserve it. When Catherine confronted Patrick, he showed no remorse. He blamed her for his infidelity, claimed she had become boring and overly focused on their daughter, and suggested that she should be grateful he had stayed in the marriage at all. Then, he delivered an ultimatum that would define the next 20 years of Catherine's life. He told her that if she pursued a divorce, he would use every resource available to destroy her reputation and ensure she lost custody of Nicole. He knew judges, he reminded her. He had connections. He would paint her as an unfit mother, and he would make certain that she was left with nothing. Catherine was terrified, not of poverty or loss of status, but of losing her daughter. Nicole was preparing for college applications. She was thriving academically and socially. The idea of putting her through a custody battle, of potentially being separated from her, was unbearable. Catherine made a decision that would haunt her for 2 decades. She stayed. She remained in the marriage, maintaining the facade of normalcy, telling no one about the affair or Patrick's threats. She protected Nicole from the truth, ensuring her daughter's final year at home remained stable and positive. Nicole left for college the following year, and Catherine continued living the lie. She and Patrick maintained separate bedrooms, speaking to each other only when necessary, presenting a united front in public while existing as strangers in private. Patrick continued his affairs, no longer bothering to hide them from Catherine, though he remained careful to maintain appearances with everyone else. Catherine focused on her work, on maintaining her relationship with Nicole, and on simply enduring one day at a time. The years accumulated in this fashion. Nicole graduated from college, established her own career, married James, and had 2 children. Catherine became a devoted grandmother, finding in her grandchildren a source of joy that had been absent from her life for many years. She remained in the marriage, partly from habit, partly from fear, and partly because she had convinced herself that this was simply her lot in life. She had made her choice 20 years earlier, and now she had to live with the consequences. Then, 14 months before the Family Feud taping, Patrick suffered a massive stroke. He survived but was left partially paralyzed and requiring extensive care. Catherine, despite everything, cared for him during his recovery. It was during those months of caring for a man who could no longer control or threaten her that Catherine began to truly examine her life. She realized that she had spent 20 years in a prison of her own making, sacrificing her happiness and authenticity for a marriage that had been hollow for decades. Patrick eventually recovered enough to move to an assisted living facility where he could receive proper care. For the first time in her adult life, Catherine lived alone. The house that had represented both her achievement and her cage was now simply a space she occupied. It was during this period of solitude and reflection that Catherine began attending therapy, something she had never allowed herself to do during her marriage. Through therapy, she began to understand the patterns of control and manipulation that had defined her life, the ways she had internalized messages about duty and appearance, and the tremendous cost of living inauthentically. Her therapist encouraged Catherine to begin telling the truth about her life, starting with the people closest to her. Catherine knew she needed to tell Nicole. Her daughter was now 32 years old, married with children of her own. She deserved to know the truth about her parents' marriage and about the choices Catherine had made. However, Catherine struggled to find the courage. She feared Nicole's judgment, feared disrupting her daughter's perception of their family history, feared that honesty after so many years of deception would destroy their relationship. When Nicole mentioned that she had submitted an application for the family to appear on Family Feud, Catherine's first reaction was resistance. The idea of being on television, of being visible and exposed, felt overwhelming. However, something in her had shifted during those months of therapy and solitude. She agreed to participate, and as the taping date approached, Catherine began to feel that perhaps this public platform could provide the push she needed to finally speak her truth. She did not plan what happened during the taping. She did not rehearse or prepare a speech. However, she carried with her the knowledge that if the right moment presented itself, she would find the courage to be honest. The Walsh family arrived at the studio on a Tuesday morning, dressed in coordinating navy blue and white outfits that Nicole had carefully selected. Catherine's grandchildren, 21-year-old Michael and 19-year-old Emma, were excited and energetic. James was relaxed and cheerful. Nicole was organized and focused, clearly wanting everything to go perfectly. Catherine observed her family with a mixture of love and sadness, knowing that what she was carrying inside might change their dynamic forever. Their opponents were the Rodriguez family from Miami, a warm and boisterous group who brought infectious energy to the stage. Steve Harvey opened the show with his characteristic humor, and the competition began. The first question asked families to name something people do when they cannot sleep. Catherine's son-in-law James buzzed in and answered correctly with, "Watch television." The Walsh family took control and won the first round easily. Everyone was smiling and engaged. The second round presented a question about what people regret not doing earlier in life. Catherine felt her heart rate increase as Steve Harvey read the question. Nicole buzzed in and answered traveling, which was on the board. As the family played, various answers appeared. Starting a business, having children, going back to school. Then it was Catherine's turn. She stood at the podium, and Steve Harvey looked at her with his warm, encouraging smile. "Catherine, what do people regret not doing earlier in life?" he asked. Catherine hesitated, and in that hesitation something shifted in her expression. "Telling the truth," she said quietly. The answer was on the board at number 6. However, Steve Harvey noticed something in Catherine's demeanor that suggested this was more than just a game show answer. "Telling the truth," Steve repeated thoughtfully. "That's a powerful answer. You speaking from experience there." Catherine met his eyes and nodded slowly. "Yes," she said simply. The studio audience, sensing something beneath the surface of this exchange, grew quieter. Steve Harvey, with the instinct that had made him exceptional at connecting with contestants, did not move to the next question immediately. "You want to tell us about that?" he asked gently. Catherine looked at Nicole, who was watching with curiosity but not yet concern. She looked at her grandchildren, at James, and then back at Steve. "I spent 20 years not telling the truth," Catherine said. 20 years living a lie to protect what I thought mattered. And I am done." The Walsh family won that round, but the mood on their side of the stage had changed. Nicole approached her mother during the commercial break. "Mom, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. Catherine took her daughter's hand. "I need to tell you something. I need everyone to know something. And I think this might be the only way I can finally find the courage to say it." The game continued through several more rounds, with the Walsh family performing well, despite the undercurrent of tension that had developed. Catherine's answers were solid, but she seemed distracted, as if she was working through something internally while the game progressed around her. Steve Harvey kept glancing at her, his expression showing that he recognized something significant was happening beneath the surface of the competition. The Walsh family ultimately won the main game and earned the right to play fast money. During the setup for that final round, Catherine made a decision. She approached Steve Harvey directly, while cameras were still rolling but before the fast money questions began. Her family watched from their position near the podium, uncertain what was happening. "Steve, before we play for the money, I need to say something," Catherine stated, her voice steady despite the visible tremor in her hands. "I need to tell the truth that I have been hiding for 20 years. And I need to tell it here, now, in front of my daughter and my grandchildren, because if I do not do it this way, I might never find the courage." Steve Harvey set down his cards and gave Catherine his complete attention. The studio had fallen silent. The production crew, initially uncertain whether to continue filming, received a signal from the director to keep cameras rolling. Everyone present sensed they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical game show moment. Catherine turned to face Nicole directly. Your father and I have not had a real marriage for 20 years. She began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. When you were 17 and preparing for college, I discovered that your father had been having an affair. When I confronted him, he threatened to destroy me in a divorce, to use his connections to ensure I lost custody of you. I was terrified of losing you, so I stayed. And I kept the secret, and I have been living a lie ever since. Nicole's face registered shock, then pain, then a complicated mixture of emotions that crossed her features rapidly. Catherine continued, needing to say everything now that she had begun. I told myself I was protecting you, that I was doing what was necessary to keep our family stable. However, the truth is that I was also protecting myself from the shame of admitting failure, from having to acknowledge that the perfect life I had worked so hard to build was false. I was afraid of what people would think, afraid of disappointing my own parents, afraid of being judged. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face now, but she did not stop. Your father had multiple affairs over the years. We lived as strangers in the same house, speaking only when necessary, maintaining appearances for the outside world while our marriage was completely hollow. When he had his stroke last year and moved to assisted living, I finally had the space to realize what I had done to myself, what I had sacrificed for the sake of appearance and fear. Catherine's voice broke slightly, but she pushed forward. Nicole, I am so sorry. I am sorry for lying to you for 20 years. I am sorry for modeling a marriage that taught you that women should endure and accommodate rather than demand respect and honesty. I am sorry for all the times you came to me for advice about relationships, and I gave you guidance based on maintaining peace rather than insisting on truth. I am sorry for wasting 20 years of my life and for letting you believe that was normal or acceptable. She turned to address Steve Harvey and the studio audience. I am 58 years old. I have spent the majority of my adult life living in authentically, prioritizing what others thought over what I needed, choosing the appearance of success over the reality of happiness. I am standing here today because I realized that if I cannot be honest now, I will die never having truly lived. I would rather lose this game and tell the truth than win money built on continued deception. The silence in the studio was profound. Then Nicole stepped forward, tears running down her own face, and embraced her mother. Mom, I am so sorry you carried this alone for so long, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I wish you had told me. I wish you had trusted me to understand. However, I am grateful you are telling me now. It is not too late. Steve Harvey was visibly moved, his own eyes glistening with tears. He approached Catherine and Nicole, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual performance quality. This was simply one human being responding to another's pain and courage. Catherine, what you just did is one of the bravest things I have ever witnessed on this stage or anywhere else, he said. You stood here in front of cameras, in front of strangers, in front of your family, and you told a truth that must have been burning inside you for 2 decades. That takes a kind of courage most people never find. He turned to address the audience and the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, we talk about winning and losing on this show. We celebrate when families answer questions correctly and take home prize money. However, what Catherine just did is more valuable than any amount of money we could give her. She chose authenticity over appearance. She chose truth over comfort. She chose to free herself from a prison of her own making, and in doing so, she just taught all of us something about what real courage looks like. Steve looked back at Catherine. 20 years is a long time to carry a secret that heavy. 20 years is a long time to live inauthentically. However, you know what? You still have time. You are 58 years old. If you live to be 88, you have got 30 more years to live honestly, to build a life based on truth, to show your grandchildren what it means to choose yourself without apology. That is a gift. Catherine's grandson Michael approached, followed by his sister Emma. Both young adults embraced their grandmother, and Michael spoke clearly enough for the microphones to capture. Grandma, thank you for trusting us with the truth. Thank you for showing us that it is never too late to choose authenticity. That means more to us than any game show victory ever could. Steve Harvey wiped his eyes openly, not attempting to hide his emotional response. "I have been doing this show for many years," he said. "I have seen incredible answers. I have seen amazing comebacks. I have seen families win life-changing amounts of money. However, Catherine, what you just gave your family is worth more than anything this show could provide. You gave them truth. You gave them an example of courage. You gave them permission to prioritize authenticity in their own lives. That is legacy." The production crew was in tears. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many people crying openly. This had transcended entertainment and become a genuine moment of human transformation witnessed in real time. After several minutes of emotional processing, Steve Harvey made an executive decision. "Catherine, your family has earned the right to play fast money. However, I want to give you a choice. We can play for the money right now, or we can pause. Let you and your family take the time you need to process what just happened, and come back to finish this another time. What would you like to do?" Catherine looked at Nicole, at her grandchildren, at James. Then she looked back at Steve. "I would like to play," she said firmly. "Not because I care about the money, though it would certainly be useful. However, because I want to finish what I started. I want to complete something honestly, with my family beside me, with truth rather than deception as our foundation. I want to show that even after revealing something painful, we can still move forward together." Steve smiled, his respect for Catherine evident. "Then let us play fast money." The game proceeded, and Catherine's performance was solid though not perfect. Her daughter Nicole completed the second round, and together they scored enough points to win the $20,000. However, the victory felt almost incidental to what had already occurred. The money was real and would be helpful, but it was not the story that anyone would remember about this taping. After the game concluded, Steve asked if the family would be willing to stay and talk further, off the air but on camera, for a potential follow-up segment. The Walsh family agreed. In that extended conversation, Nicole shared her own perspective, explaining that while the revelation had been shocking, she had always sensed something was not quite right in her parents' marriage. She had attributed it to normal marital stress and aging, never imagining the full truth of what her mother had endured. Nicole also revealed something that stunned Catherine. She shared that she had struggled in her own marriage during the first several years, experiencing some of the same patterns of accommodation and self-silencing that Catherine had modeled. However, through therapy and the support of friends, Nicole had learned to establish healthy boundaries and communicate authentically with James. Hearing her mother's story helped Nicole understand where some of her own patterns had originated and reinforced her commitment to modeling something different for her own children. The conversation that day lasted for over 2 hours. The family discussed patterns of silence and appearance that had characterized multiple generations. They talked about the ways that cultural and religious expectations around marriage and duty had shaped their choices. They explored how gender roles and societal pressures had made it difficult for Catherine to see alternatives to enduring her situation. They acknowledged pain while also expressing gratitude that truth had finally emerged. Steve Harvey participated in portions of this conversation, sharing his own observations about the pressure people feel to maintain appearances and the terrible cost of living inauthentically. He talked about people he had known who spent their entire lives pretending to be something they were not, who died without ever experiencing the freedom that comes from radical honesty. He emphasized that Catherine's courage in speaking her truth publicly might give other people permission to do the same in their own lives. The original game show episode aired 3 months later. The producers made the unusual decision to include significant portions of Catherine's revelation and the conversation that followed. They framed it carefully, with appropriate content warnings and resources for viewers who might be experiencing similar situations. The episode became one of the most watched in Family Feud history, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours of the episode airing, Catherine received thousands of messages through social media and the Family Feud contact channels. Women and men from around the country shared their own stories of living inauthentically, of staying in situations that diminished them, of prioritizing appearance over truth. Many people wrote that Catherine's courage had inspired them to finally have difficult conversations they had been avoiding. Several people credited the episode with giving them the push they needed to leave unhealthy relationships or to finally tell truths they had been hiding for years. Domestic violence organizations and mental health professionals praised the episode for bringing attention to emotional abuse and the subtle forms of control that can exist in relationships. Marriage counselors reported increased requests for help from people who had been maintaining appearances while struggling privately. The episode sparked national conversations about authenticity, about the costs of silence, and about the possibility of reclaiming one's life at any age. Catherine herself became an unexpected spokesperson for authentic living and second chances. She was invited to speak at various organizations and events. She connected with a nonprofit that supported women leaving controlling relationships and became involved in their mentoring program. She began writing about her experiences, eventually publishing a memoir that detailed her journey from silence to truth. The book resonated with readers of all ages who were struggling with similar questions about authenticity, courage, and the possibility of change. Nicole and Catherine's relationship deepened significantly following the revelation. The honesty that had characterized their interaction on Family Feud became the foundation for a new kind of connection between them. They attended therapy together to work through the complicated feelings that emerged from learning the truth about Catherine's marriage. Nicole processed her grief about not knowing what her mother had endured and her admiration for the choice Catherine had finally made. Catherine worked through her guilt about keeping secrets and her fear about how those secrets had affected her daughter. 1 year after the episode aired, Family Feud invited the Walsh family back for a special follow-up segment. The family gathered on stage again, this time with a very different energy than their first appearance. Catherine looked lighter, younger somehow, as if releasing the burden she had carried for 20 years had physically transformed her. She shared that she had filed for divorce from Patrick, who had not contested it. She had sold the house that held so many painful memories and had moved into a smaller place that she had chosen and decorated to reflect her own taste rather than anyone else's expectations. Catherine also shared that she had reconnected with friends from earlier in her life, people she had drifted away from during her years of maintaining appearances. She had taken up painting, something she had loved as a young woman but had abandoned when Patrick dismissed it as a waste of time. She was traveling, exploring interests she had suppressed, and building a life that felt authentic and her own. Most importantly, she reported that she felt truly happy for the first time in decades. Nicole shared her own growth, explaining that watching her mother choose truth had inspired changes in her own life. She had become more honest about her needs and boundaries in all her relationships. She had stopped committing to volunteer activities she did not actually enjoy. She had begun pursuing her own interests more actively rather than always prioritizing everyone else's needs. She credited her mother's example with giving her permission to prioritize authenticity. Steve Harvey, clearly moved once again by the family's journey, spoke directly to the camera. A year ago, Catherine stood on this stage and did something extraordinary. She told the truth after 20 years of silence. She chose courage over comfort. She showed her family and all of us watching that it is never too late to reclaim your life and live authentically. Today, we are seeing the fruits of that courage. Catherine is not just surviving, she is thriving. She is building a life based on truth, and that foundation cannot be shaken. He continued with words that would be widely shared and quoted. I want to speak directly to anyone watching who is living a lie right now. Anyone who is maintaining an appearance while dying inside. Anyone who has convinced themselves that it is too late to change, that they have invested too much time in a situation to leave it, that telling the truth would hurt too many people. Catherine's story proves that the cost of continued silence is always higher than the cost of truth. It proves that liberation is possible at any age. It proves that the people who love you want the real you, not the performance you think you need to give them. The follow-up segment included interviews with several people who had been inspired by Catherine's original appearance to make changes in their own lives. There was a 62-year-old man who had finally come out as gay after maintaining a heterosexual marriage for 35 years. There was a 45-year-old woman who had left a prestigious career that made her miserable to pursue work she found meaningful. There was a 54-year-old man who had confronted his adult children about enabling his wife's addiction rather than continuing to pretend the problem did not exist. Each person credited Catherine's courage with helping them find their own. The psychological and social impact of Catherine's story was analyzed in academic settings. Researchers studying authentic living and life transitions interviewed her about her decision to speak publicly and the factors that had kept her silent for so long. Her story became a case study in courses about domestic abuse, authentic communication, and life course development. Scholars noted that her experience illustrated how cultural narratives about duty, particularly regarding women's roles in marriage, could trap people in situations that diminished their well-being and prevented authentic living. 5 years after her original appearance, Catherine was thriving in ways she could never have imagined during those decades of silent suffering. She had published her memoir, which had found a substantial audience and generated meaningful conversations about authenticity and second chances. She had established a foundation that provided support and resources for people trying to leave controlling relationships or rebuild their lives after long periods of living inauthentically. She had developed a community of people who valued honesty and authenticity, and she had become known as someone who would tell difficult truths with compassion. Her relationship with Nicole had evolved into one of the most important and sustaining connections in both their lives. They spoke regularly, not just about practical matters but about ideas, feelings, and dreams. Nicole told interviewers that having a mother who was finally living authentically had freed her to do the same. Catherine's grandchildren, now young adults establishing their own lives, cited their grandmother as their primary example of courage and the importance of choosing truth over comfort. Catherine herself reflected frequently on that October day when she stood on the Family Feud stage and finally spoke the truth she had carried for 20 years. In interviews and speaking engagements, she consistently emphasized several key insights from her experience. She talked about how living inauthentically does not protect the people we love. It actually deprives them of genuine connection with us. She discussed how the things we fear about telling the truth are usually less devastating than the ongoing cost of maintaining lies. She emphasized that it is never too late to choose authenticity and that every day spent living honestly is valuable regardless of how many years were spent living falsely. 10 years after the episode aired, Catherine was 68 years old and living a life that felt entirely her own. She had remarried, this time to someone who valued her authenticity and supported her continued growth. She maintained close relationships with her children and grandchildren, all of whom had been positively influenced by her example. She continued her advocacy work and her writing, always emphasizing that transformation is possible at any stage of life. The original Family Feud episode remained one of the most viewed and referenced episodes in the show's history. It was used in educational settings, shared in support groups, and referenced in countless conversations about courage, authenticity, and the possibility of change. Steve Harvey himself cited it as one of the most meaningful moments of his career, noting that it had reminded him of the power of creating space for people to be honest, and the importance of responding to vulnerability with compassion rather than judgment. Catherine's story became part of a larger cultural conversation about authentic living, about the costs of maintaining appearances, and about the possibility of reclaiming one's life after years of living according to others' expectations or fears. Mental health professionals noted that her willingness to speak publicly about her experience had helped reduce shame and stigma around staying in unhealthy situations and had encouraged more people to seek help sooner rather than enduring silently for years or decades. The most profound impact, however, was immeasurable and personal. It existed in the individual decisions made by people who watched Catherine speak her truth and found the courage to speak their own. It existed in the relationships that became more authentic because one person chose honesty over performance. It existed in the lives reclaimed, the prisons escaped, the years salvaged from the wreckage of inauthentic living. Catherine's courage on that October afternoon created ripples that extended far beyond what any game show typically accomplishes. As this remarkable story demonstrates, the most valuable prizes are not monetary. They are found in the courage to be honest, in the freedom that comes from living authentically, and in the connections we build when we show up as our true selves rather than performing roles we think are expected. Catherine Walsh's moment on Family Feud became a moment of truth that continues to inspire and transform lives more than a decade later. If this story has moved you, if you recognize the importance of living authentically and supporting others in their journey toward truth, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, because Catherine's courage that October afternoon carries a message that remains urgently relevant. It is never too late to choose truth over comfort, to reclaim your life from the prison of appearances, and to discover that authentic living, however challenging, is the only path to genuine peace and happiness. The people who love you want your truth, not your performance, and the life you build on that foundation of honesty, regardless of when you start building it, will be worth every difficult moment it takes to create it.